Good morning. My name is Jayson Coil, Operations Section Chief for Southwest Area Team 1. Today is July 19th, and this is your morning operational update on the Laguna fire. We are still reporting the fire at 16,004 acres. We did not get an infrared flight last night. It was ordered, but it's what we call UTF'd, unable to fill. It could have been a mechanical with the aircraft. It could have been too many competing priorities. But regardless of the reason, we did not get infrared, so the reported acres is 16,004 again today. Now, when I go to the map, I'm going to tell you some of the stuff we did that added to those acres. I acknowledge that. There are 298 personnel assigned to the incident, and percent containment has increased to 47%. So before let me just start with this. This is a full suppression incident, and all of the actions that we're taking are intended on controlling the fire within the smallest footprint practical. And that word practical is important for the planned actions, everything that we have doing, because there's a number of things that constrain us. Resource availability is one of the things that constrains us. Access and extraction limitations, if we can get people out of the area that we propose that they work in if they get injured. The tempo and the capacity of both the system at large and then the system more locally. The smoke and air quality, weather and environmental factors, outflow winds, wetting rains that may not put the fire out, but that'll prevent us from doing effective ignition operations, something like that. And then the limits of authority and action. We could have some really bright ideas that may not be within our ability to execute. And so in that case, they're just merely interesting. But I did want to say that full suppression requires us to develop a strategy and a decision-making process where we're effective while avoiding unnecessary risk to firefighters, the public, and the long-term values. So full suppression does not mean that we will take risks that are beyond what we're willing to accept, or that we'll ask crews to take risks that are beyond what they're willing to accept. It just means that the intent is to put the fire out at the smallest footprint practical. But what that looks like is going to be dependent on terrain and a number of those factors that I just talked about. The other thing I wanted to touch on is the operations that we conduct to secure a fire line. So some of the comments on Facebook talked about a controlled burn and other terms. And lots of times it may seem pedantic, but we have certain terminology that means certain things. So I am going to tell you about how we construct a fire line and why we do the different steps, and try to relate it to something that I imagine y'all living up in the mountains, if it was where I live, have an appreciation for, and that's shoveling snow. So in this scenario, it's a driveway, goes to a sidewalk, and you have some things around the sidewalk you don't want to hurt. So in that case, because I've gotten in trouble for this before, first thing you do is you go along the edge of the sidewalk and you clear the edge so you know where the edge of the sidewalk is. And then if it's near a flower bed or something, I get my bigger snow shovel, and then I can clear off the sidewalk without running the risk of cutting the bulbs out of the ground and getting in trouble with my wife. And then the next thing you do is, in between those areas that you've got it all cleared out, or in a driveway where you have a lot of space on either side, then you go in and you plow it, or you use a bigger snowblower or whatever. But that's like our steps. So the first thing we do is we put in a fire line. That's shoveling the edges. The next thing we do is we do hand ignitions. That's like getting in there and around the flower beds and everything. It is more deliberate. It takes longer, and it is less of there's a lower magnitude to it, because you're doing it from the edge of the fire, and then as that fire moves off, the edge of the fire line, as the fire moves off that fire line, then you can pick up the pace. Just like if you're working on the edge of your driveway, trying to be careful not to go off into the rocks and have to replace your shear pin or whatever, you'd be more careful, right? When you get in the middle of those open field areas, not such a big deal. And then when it comes to the plowing, that's the aerial ignition. And the plowing is removing everything in between the lines. And we have to do the aerial ignition if we expect the line to be secure. And sticking with my little snow analogy, it's just like if you put a berm on the wrong side of your driveway, right? You put a berm on the upwind side of your driveway, and it's fine as long as the wind doesn't blow. Then you get a bunch of wind. Next thing you know, you got a huge drift across your driveway, and everything you did was for naught. That's kind of the same thing about filling in the holes. If we have leave those unburned islands open, and the wind doesn't blow, and we don't get any outflows from storms, that's probably fine. But if the wind blows, then just like it pushes snow, it'll push those embers across the line and into the areas that we don't want it, and then we will lose containment. So I don't know if that was helpful. I hope it was, but that's how that's why we use those different tools. That's how we use those different tools, and that's how it relates to one of my favorite wintertime activities. All right, with that, we'll go to the map. First, we're going to start up here in Division Alpha, and that's up in the northwest corner of the fire, and we're going to zoom in on that. And this is the same map as yesterday, and that's because we did not get infrared. So last night, the Division Alpha resources were able to begin hand firing operations up here at this H on this hand line, and bring it all the way down to where the fire had actually touched the dozer line, and then all the way down to the main fire's edge. They completed that operation at about 2100. Did have some unfavorable winds after that from outflow storms to the east, but the report I got this morning was that the fire is still contained within the control lines, and it's starting to back off of those control lines. So we're increasing depth. It was lit near the dozer line, near the hand line, and now that fire is backing off the line. That is going to increase smoke production, but not significantly. I mean, it's a rather small area. So the intent is still, our primary control line is still that natural barrier, going back around and then tying back into the Rio Galena drainage. That's the activity that will continue today in Division Alpha. So now we're going to go back to the big map, and we're going to look at the La Presa drainage and the area in Division Mike. All right, so talked about yesterday, evaluating the feasibility of using ground resources to tie the fire's edge up here on the top of the rim all the way down to the bottom, or these steep cliffs just above the La Presa drainage. So we evaluated that, and it's not feasible. The remote evaluation we did with like Google Earth and other tools to measure the slope and try to appreciate the steepness and the ability to move through that country did not align with what was found when they went out on the ground. It was too slippery, too steep, and just too dangerous and too difficult to get people out of here. So we are now going to go with what was our plan B, and that is utilizing the heavy helicopters. We're going to look at the feasibility and the likelihood of success of us being able to put wet line in. Basically, we have 3 of them right now, so we have 3 heavy helicopters, and run them all at the same time and create a line along the fuel where it gets sparse, where we basically wash all the ground fuel off of there in that little area. And then we begin ignitions behind that. And then the intent is to keep the fire above this natural barrier and all the way around here, so we can prevent these areas of activity from continuing to move down the slope, get back around, and then run up the La Presa drainage. So that plan today is going to be dependent upon the effectiveness of the firing operations, and then how well they're able to get that wet line established. And it would start later in the day. If we do that, there's going to be smoke production in here. If we were to complete this line all the way around here, it would add about 1,000 acres to the total acreage of the fire. So that is what we have planned for today in this area. And concurrent with those activities, they're continuing to enhance their structure protection in all the areas to the east, and the same thing along the Galena Canyon. And the third control line, which goes all the way up to the Galena Mountain Road, they are also continuing to work on prepping that and finishing the prep on that if it was necessary to use it. So, especially in Division Alpha, after the success last night, we have a greater degree of confidence in our ability to be successful today with their planned actions. However, until they're successful, we're going to concurrently continue to make sure that our secondary and our tertiary control features are enhanced so they are viable. It does zero good to have a contingency plan that is a contingency plan in word only. The actions have to be undertaken to make it where that if the primary plan was to fail, with the time available, you could effectively implement one of those contingency plans. So that's a concurrent effort that's going on today. I hope that made sense, and this concludes your operational update for July 19th. Thank you.